Hey, this is our 1302 dual credit, and it is February 5th. And today we're continuing on with our lecture over what led up to the American Revolution. So, if you remember last time, we were talking about there were many protests and there were repeals of all of these terrible taxes and things like that from the British. It's going to boil over into where we have a protest that goes kinetic in which Americans die, British soldiers are on trial, and then the British government is going to be deeply embarrassed by this as the Boston Tea Party. And if you'll recall, you're going to have the British following this are going to pass, after this, you're going to have the First Continental Congress, in which the colonies are going to send in delegates, and then they're going to establish a militia, agree to have a form of government, an emergency government, and ignore the intolerable acts, and also appeal to the king, to England, and write Parliament saying, please remove this stuff. This is why we're upset. We have no representation in government. We're being forced to purchase from monopolies, all these other things. We want our freedom as English subjects of the crown. And well, they didn't get it. And so Boston is going to be under military occupation. Its ports are going to be closed off. People aren't going to be allowed to go in and out of the city. The military are going to conduct police actions and raids into warehouses, homes, and businesses, searching for illegal goods and weapons, anything that, and also illegal literature that could be deemed as rebellious. The other colonies are going to be very sympathetic to Bostonites. They're, or is it Bostonians? Is it Bostonians? Bostonians? Yeah, Boston. That sounds good. I don't know. But in any case, so there's going to be a lot of pro-Boston propaganda going throughout the colony, showing their hardships and all these things they're going through, and that they really need to stand with them, and the British just need to get out. So,
what was it? I didn't get all the laws written down.
Ooh, that one?
Yes.
Okay, well, you can have it. If it helps, it's all on the Google Classroom.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
All right. All right, so from bad to worse. 1774, the Quebec Act. So remember, this is past, we were talking about things that after the French and Indian War, the British were actually very lenient towards the French people who decided to become British subjects in Canada. So they're now under the crown, under what we will call the English Commonwealth. And we're going to see that they're going to be given what the colonists see as favorable treatment. While they're having things like soldiers having to go through their homes, they're having to feed them, they're having to pay these extra taxes, they're having no rights, they're being insulted in Parliament and all this other stuff. Canada, who they just fought a war against and shed blood for, and the crown, in order to defeat them, are treated like better people than them. This is going to totally incense the Americans. And so that brings me to the Quebec Act. This is passed extending Quebec's boundaries. The colonists, remember, after this French and Indian War, were told, you can't go past the Appalachian Mountains. No. And they're out of land, essentially. There's nowhere else for them to go. They're hitting a population crisis. People are not able, and it's farming is where most people make their livelihoods. Unless you're in Canada, you can move out as much as you want. They gave the Catholic Church preferential status in Canada. And so colonies didn't like this because they looked back at their ancestors and they're like, well, a lot of our Puritan ancestors fought religious wars against the Catholic Church. And we see that you're now like giving them favorable status in Canada. What about us? And recognize their French legal codes. So we see that in the colonies, we've had local governments suspended, where they've had their own sets of laws and their own representative governments, but because the crown saw them as rebellious, they were squashed and nullified. However, if you live in Canada, you get to keep laws that aren't even British. So that really got under the skin. So I think the French laws at this time were based on the old Justinian code from like Byzantium, if I remember. It might be more Western Roman stuff. But in any case, it's not common law. And even to this day, Canada has different legal theories than we do because of their older French legal codes, which is not based on common law, which is based on jure precedent, where court rulings set future court rulings, and customs tend to be treated as law. So, Colin Solis is favoritism. Following the First Continental Congress, bands and militia manned by Minutemen organized and pooled together munitions. Together, they're called Minutemen because they were to be ready at a minute's notice, whether through message or hearing church bells. Remember, this is a long American tradition where the militia would muster on the weekends and train people who knew one another within their communities. And sometimes they were called together to do vigilante justice, border protection, things like that. And this is nothing new. This is a very Republican idea, because this kind of thing was done in England at times as well, especially during times of the English Civil War. And it was also done in republics in the Renaissance, in like say in Florence and stuff like that during the days of Machiavelli, where you have people who are proud citizens of a republic. They work on the weekdays, they go to church on Sunday, and on Saturday, they train in the militia. So they kept it American. General Gage, the commanding officer in Boston, received intel that munitions. Now munitions, it's like something like gunpowder, balls of shot for either muskets or cannons. Of course, these colonists don't have cannons. And that's going to be a big problem for the revolutionaries, because cannons require essentially early stages of factories in order to smelt that much iron and steel, in order to mold something that big without it like cracking and stuff like that. So these were made in either in the continent or like France and stuff, or made in England. And they're a little expensive to import. They're heavy, right? It's not that they had restrictions against them. It was just impractical to get them at this time. So General Gage, the commanding officer in Boston, received intel that munitions, Sam Adams and John Hancock were hiding in Concord, Massachusetts. So Sam Adams, the leader of, the Sons of Liberty. John Hancock was also one of the leaders of Sons of Liberty, and of course, is also a very well-known smuggler, which was like a big heroic status person during his time. And so General Gage believed if he could just cut the head off the snake, if he could get rid of the leadership of the loudmouths, and if he could take their weapons, and the rest of the colonists would fall in line, kind of like sheep. So that's where it's going to start. First off, people are going to be mad because the government is restricting their liberty, forcing them to spend money they don't want to, restricting their economic freedom. And later on, it's one of those things that I don't believe is that you can separate. Economic freedom is personal freedom. You can't separate the two. If you try to get rid of one, you're going to lose the other. And the colonists believe this as well, though they might not have even said it in those terms. But Then, of course, they try to take away their munitions. It was the right of an Englishman, especially a colonist, to have his firearms in days of Indian attacks and hunting. And now to remove a tyrant, that was seen as something you had to do. You ready? Okay, good. Hey, there we go. So here we have Concord and Lexington. But yeah, so and here we have it. We're gonna have the militia's gonna muster. Not all of them make it back home, and these aren't things that people do irrationally, in a sense, or spontaneously. The gentleman who participated in this, I remember one story. One of the men who fell, his wife helped him get his gun. She helped put on his coat and his hat for him to leave, and she knew he wasn't going to make it back. So these were the whole families knew. It's kind of like the sacrifice people make on a collective scale. And they know that if they die, that means that there's going to be less help on the farm. But they thought that defending their rights was so important, they were willing to jeopardize not only their own lives, but even the well-being of their families. And their families supported them in this, knowing full well the risk. So you can say that the ideas that these folks had within their heads and their hearts was enough to take risk, not just for yourself, but for others as well. And those other people were willing to accept the risk with them. So that's a pretty big step there, because it's easy today to find individuals who are willing to do this or that. But to have communities like that, whole families like that, I think that shows just how much people believe that they were being mistreated in a way that was cause for war and essentially societal divorce. All right, so the shot heard around the world. This is often credited with King George, but they think it's fiction. They don't think he really said it. So Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith and Major John Pitcairn led 700 redcoats to Concord. Paul Revere and William Dawes warned the Patriots of their advance. So the famous midnight ride of Paul Revere. And so the Sons of Liberty and the local militias had already set up a network of a warning system, plans on what to do, hidden caches of weapons, and all these contingency plans. So they were as ready as they could be. They were very conscious about what was going on. Many of them were war veterans from prior British wars. And so they weren't exactly just people who decided to get in something they didn't understand the ramifications of, right? So in 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord. In Lexington, 70 Minutemen led by Captain John Parker fought the Redcoats on the village green. So you could essentially think it's like downtown, right, for their area. So no one is sure who fired the first shot. The British warned them to drop their arms and go away. Obviously, they didn't want to do that. 8 Americans died on the spot and 10 were wounded before the Redcoats then turned and marched on the Concord. Samuel Adams and John Hancock escaped. As the British marched to Concord, 4,000 Minutemen shot at the Redcoats from concealment. This caused the Redcoats to retreat while being sniped along the way. So, step one, the militia are essentially doing a delaying action. They know they didn't have a chance, but they laid down the groundwork for the enemy's targets to go away. Sam Adams and John Hancock, bless you. So though it's seen as a loss, it actually fulfilled its objective. It distracted them and allowed these folks to go away. And the other militiamen from surrounding areas, once they heard the news was going on, they mustered and they went along the roadways, which the British were going to march back from. And using Indian fighting tactics, did smart things like hide behind trees so you can't get seen or shot, and you shoot at them. And they were pretty good shots too. These are gentlemen who grew up hunting when your aim can determine whether you're going to have dinner or not. Whereas the British was notorious for not training their soldiers in how to shoot, not shoot well. Very rarely they would, yeah, kind of like Star Wars. Very rarely they would have them go up into like Napoleonic formation and fire what's called volleys. And so when they would all just fire at once in a general area. Even when you fast forward like many years later to like the Boer Wars, the British will still practice these volleys and very, very rarely have their soldiers try to shoot at a target. They just didn't believe in it. It's not their mindset. And so they were very surprised at the lethality of these soldiers. And a lot of these muskets weren't even rifled. So the ball wasn't exactly going where you wanted it to anyways. But at least they could get the general area. So the British were horrified by this. They never fought anything like this before. So the march back to Boston, they lost man after man. They didn't know who was next. I'm sure it was very traumatic. And all they really found the whole time was just like a small bag, if I remember, of like musket balls. And they found that hidden in a pond. And so they didn't even, they're a complete failure, humiliating, and it's going to really get into their heads as they go back and they tell the other soldiers back in Boston. So, yeah.
In a book we had to read for English, it was called David and Goliath.
Mm-hmm.
It talked about how the underdog always wins by doing something not the normal way.
Mm.
And it said that George Washington did so good in the American Revolution because he started out with guerrilla tactics of shooting from the trees, but he almost lost the war because he tried to face them head on.
Yes. And the only way that Washington ever won head on was with the French. And we had the French were able to help surround them and use their navy to effectively use artillery to kind of blast them into submission. So yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. I mean, you can think about that for just about any war. Yeah, where you have the underdogs win, because like you look at things like Vietnam. Gosh, like it was just at first it seemed like such a like our conventional forces totally wiped out the Viet Cong. Totally, it just made joining the Viet Cong into a death sentence. However, once they adopted underground tactics, and quite literally, actually, like miles of tunnels powered by exercise bikes hooked up to generators, and they would just have like these underground hospitals, cafeterias and stuff. They would have supply trains that would go through the villages, and the villages would either be threatened or coerced into helping them. And it was just, but also the people believed in it, and because a lot of the Vietnamese, they kind of cared less about communism. They just thought of us as foreigners in their country. Afghanistan, honestly, I mean, sheesh, Afghanistan, they've been really good about unconventional tactics, especially up in the mountains. And they're very smart about that. But whenever we find them, we kill them pretty quick. It's just, we have such a severe technological advantage over them. Yeah, it definitely happens. Civil War, I mean, that was very unconventional. How Grant won. He just kept throwing humans at the army until Confederates ran out of supplies and stuff. All right, next one. All right, so this is battle just outside of Boston. And so the militia are going to get very, very amped up about this. They've been waiting for a long time to finally go get themselves some redcoats. And we're going to see that as they siege Boston, they're going to come across a very, very major problem with having normal people trying to fight a war. is they don't have the logistics for it. They don't have the supplies and ammunition, food, and especially, like I was talking about, cannons, artillery, the type of stuff that makes a siege during this era kind of work out. So Bunker Hill and beyond. The British sent 3 generals, Howe, Burgoyne, and Clinton, to Boston to squash the rebellion. 1,600 patriots defended Breed's Hill outside of Boston. So it's called the Battle of Bunker Hill, but it actually happened at a place called Breed's Hill, outside of Boston, against General Howe's 2,400 redcoats. The Patriots killed or wounded 1,000 redcoats, but retreated due to lack of ammunition. So you see, the Patriots are on the offensive against a city target. That's usually very bad. Trying to take a city, especially when you have firearms involved, is a very deadly endeavor. But the Patriots, due to just their individual prowess, were able to really, really harm the British. Like you see that they took out half of them, killed or wounded. That's massive casualties. But unfortunately, like I said, they didn't have enough ammunition and stuff. Only 500 men lost, and the British gained a new respect for them. So you see, a third of the Patriots passed, almost half of the Redcoats, but they ran out of ammo, so had to go away. But yeah, usually a siege is very tough. It's especially if you're going to actually try to take that city, you want to have overwhelming numbers. You might want to, it's usually an attrition game as well. Though they did have a harbor though, so I don't know how well that would have happened with the British Navy, but it definitely let the British know that it was serious. It was serious.
So,
Mhm.
how do you retreat when you have a lack of ammo?
Yeah, I would imagine that. Yeah, so here's the thing. Normally, when you have a retreat, it's like an assault in reverse. But gosh, like today, in modern military terms, you have what's called bound to maneuver. Like while I'm moving, you're shooting to keep their head down. And then when I get to where I need to be, I shoot so that you can move. And you're bounding forward like this. And it works best whenever, after bounding, somebody comes in from the side. We call it a flank. Or maybe to the rear if you really trust the person shooting. But they didn't do that back then. That's a tactic invented by Rommel in World War II. And all modern armies use it today. Like America, just about everybody, unless they're like a third world place, they just kind of shoot from the hip. But
I don't know.
back then, I'm pretty sure it was just every man for himself running into the woods, "Woo, get out of here." So that's my imagination. I bet retreats are the hardest thing to keep organized too.
They really are. So I bet it's chaotic. The American patriots at this time were known as being like very good soldiers, but warriors, but terrible soldiers. And what that means is they didn't listen to their leadership. Like Washington's gonna have a major problem with military discipline because guys are going to tell him off all the time when he tries to give them orders they don't want to listen to until he kind of instills that discipline.
Say what? Yeah. Well, they didn't have to at first. He didn't have what you call legal authority or anything like that. They just kind of agreed to all fight together. And militias before this were notorious for, it was a bunch of guys who got together and they trained together, but the tradition had been in colonies for like over a century is that the guys in the militia would vote for who was in charge. And if they didn't like you, they would vote you out. And now you're just another soldier again, and they'll vote for someone else to be like the colonel or the captain, So it was like, they weren't used to that kind of discipline. They thought of the military as a democracy, which isn't very good in times like this. You got to have somebody at top with real authority. So, if not, yes, the Second Continental
Is this the Congress?
Yeah, and see, there's the Giorgio right there, accepting his commission as the general. I don't recognize anybody else in that. Look a little frumpy.
Did we take the fake wigs from,
We took it from the British, and they probably took it from the French. The French were like trendsetters in fashion. But yeah, I mean, like we weren't like, I don't know, like a gentleman was never supposed to smile on the public, right? It was like part of a good British gentleman's continence was to show like a serious demeanor at all times, and not to be like cruel, but like emotionless, you know, like a statue. So yeah, our last one for the day, I guess. Since I was just going to limit it to 30 minutes today, the Second Continental Congress. In 1775, the Second Continental Congress met to deal with this unexpected war. Okay, so unexpected. So we all know that it wasn't 100% unexpected. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gathered up militia and tried to get money in order to buy things like ammunition, war supplies, and stuff like that. But they weren't trying to be overt. They thought of it as like a safety net. But unfortunately, they fell off the trapeze. He was appointed commanding general of the army. So he had a lot of status from the French and Indian War, even though he had faced some losses from it. He was still seen as one of the better ones that we had in America. And he also was very good at politics in a way where people respected him as someone who was unwavering and brave. They're going to draft the Olive Branch Petition, which was rejected by King George III. And this is where they're like, we really don't want to fight a war with you. We really want to throw ourselves at the feet of the crown. We really, 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 really want your forgiveness. Just please don't send your soldiers here. Please remove these horrible taxes and let us have some representation within Parliament, just like the rest of your subjects. We love you. And he said, I don't love you back. And he rejected even opening the letter. Washington took command of the Continental Army in Massachusetts while it was still laying siege in Boston. In 1776, with the aid of cannons, Washington forced the British to flee Boston. So it's going to take a while, but we're going to manage to still secure some cannons, I think, from Fort Ticonderoga. Is that the word? Yeah. They make pencils now. And so it's going to take a while. They're going to have to load them up on wagons, bring them down muddy, unpaved roads. They're eventually going to bring them down from, I think, from New York all the way to Boston.
Henry, Knox
was one of the generals for Washington. I don't remember that was the one who got the cannon. So.
Yeah, one of the dude that brought down like 200. Yeah, no. Yeah,
Yes.
He brought down like 200 cannons.
Was it that? I thought it was like a couple dozen.
Sorry, 20. It was like 20.
Right, yeah.
I don't know if it was.
He brought it through all these mountains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it took forever. But that's going to change the course of it. Because like I told you, that's like the magic stuff right there. That would be like, I don't know, like that would be like being in charge of a third world army. Let's say, I don't know, like pick a country. And all of a sudden you found a bunch of like tanks or something like that. It would change the game for you in a sense. So, because cannons were like, for land warfare, cannons and also the kind we call mortars really changed the game. And they have their different uses. Like mortars are very fat, stocky, and they're made to shoot a ball way up high and drop it back down. And they're going to be very useful for people in sieges, especially during the Civil War, because they're going to figure out how to fill them up with explosives, make them blow up and hit the ground, shrapnel and stuff. And cannons are a bit straighter. Of course, they do have an arc, just like a bullet does. But yeah, I mean, gosh, they're not going to be used as effectively now as they will be later. Like Napoleon's going to figure out how to use artillery in combined arms with infantry
later on in a way that's going to be very, very effective. And it's going to be followed throughout the rest of military history. The idea that these things don't have to work on their own. If you can combine somehow your movements of your soldiers are interlocked with cannon fire, you can really increase the effectiveness of it to where they can clear the ground and the soldiers can take it. Or the soldiers can fix an enemy within cannon fire and then they get blasted to bits. So cruel stuff. We still do it today. I mean, ideally, like with infantry today, if you're moving, you want the artillery fire to move in front of you. Or if you find an enemy, you don't want to just jump out there and charge them. Just sit back under cover and have them blowed up. So, makes sense.
On the slide that I never finished bringing down, but I took a picture of, it said that the First Continental Congress met, and then 56 delegates from each colony except Georgia. Why except Georgia?
Georgia was the newest colony, and a lot of the folks who were in Georgia were like first generation immigrants from England, and they didn't really like the idea of this whole going against the crown thing. It was still so new too. I think that in many ways it was mostly just small farms. You couldn't even really, I don't think they had quite as well a formed local government at the time. So it just wasn't happening. I got a book I need to read about the revolution. Actually, I haven't read about the revolution in like years and years and years. It's about Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. And it was just like the nastiest, bloodiest part of the war. And so I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to it. I'm trying to fix an apocalyptic book right now. So, but that's fiction. Hey, folks, that's going to end our lecture today. See ya on Monday. Yeah, I'm